This episode discusses mental health and suicide, which may be difficult for some viewers or listeners. If you or a loved one is struggling, support is available. Please call or text 988 to connect with the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline.
Welcome back to Health Simplified, brought to you by Sentara Health Plans, where we improve health every day. I'm your host, Zanola Smith. No matter who you are or where you are in your health journey, this podcast is designed with you in mind. We're giving you simple answers to big questions surrounding health. No big words, no fluff, just facts. In today's episode, we're exploring the topic that doesn't get nearly enough attention: mental health in our older adult population. While so much of the mental health conversation is focused on younger generations, many adults over 60 are navigating deep emotional challenges, from grief and loneliness to major life transitions like retirement and health challenges. To help us make sense of it all, we are joined by Tommy Bateman of Sentara Health Plans and longtime leader of the behavioral health space. Tommy brings both clinical expertise and compassion to this conversation, and we're so grateful to have him here. All right, Tommy, thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited to have you. I know we have a huge topic to cover today, but before we get into that, can you please just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, I'm Tommy Bateman. I'm Director of Clinical Practice Management with the Government Behavioral Health Team at Sentara Health Plans. Prior to that, I've been a law enforcement officer, a substance use counselor, forensic clinician in the jails, and everything in between. So
a little bit of everything. So with this topic, we're talking about mental health and among the baby boomer population. So I know with your unique background, what really made you say, hey, this is what I'm passionate about?
Right. So one of my favorite things to discuss is how people progress through the stages of change in their life, how they develop from early childhood, teenagers, early adulthood, middle age, late middle age, and even the senior golden years. It's a lot of fun to see people and how it tends to shape into a pretty similar pattern.
Yes, that's a very interesting point that you brought up. Is what I'm hearing you say is the evolution, like we are always evolving. I think that sometimes people think like, oh, just children have these emotions or young adults, but even the baby boomer population and beyond that, we all have these feelings that probably we need to talk about.
Absolutely.
And if I'm someone listening in, I always think about my younger brother. He's probably in his 20s. If I'm someone listening in, I'm young, and I'm thinking, what is a baby boomer?
Right.
Can you kind of tell us what that population is?
So they get the name after the baby boom once World War II soldiers came back after 1945, and everybody got bit to work and had some babies, and there was a baby boom. So generally that generation is defined as those born between 1946 and 1964. Most of them are retired or about to be retired currently.
That is so interesting. You just taught me something new, because I thought it was like just an age, not the whole, World War II aspect and a booming of babies coming about. So thank you so much for letting us know that. Now we're going to dive right on into a few questions that we have that I think would be very beneficial among the population and just people in general who have loved ones who are baby boomers. I know when we talk about mental health, typically we hear the younger generation talk about it. I know my generation, we tend to be very aware of our mental health.
Right.
I think sometimes too aware. And then you have the latter part of that where the baby boomers or the older generation, it's a taboo topic. Sometimes they don't want to talk about it, or it's like, what's a therapist? Why do I have to go? I can handle it on my own. Why do you think that gap is?
Well, I mean, part of it is because the field of psychology as it exists today is relatively new. Freud and Jung weren't that long ago in history, historically speaking. And so when the baby boomers were born and really coming of age, the whole field is really just coming of age as it is today. And with the field coming of age comes a whole new slew of language. But sometimes we're describing the exact same thing that baby boomers and older generations could relate to. For example, I'm an older millennial, Gen Z. They'll definitely say things like, we have no problem using therapeutic type language. It's kind of inculcated into our culture, into our generations. We say therapeutic type things all the time, but the word therapy is kind of, it's not even truly describing what's really going on in a counseling room, right? It's something we would do all the time. What we are doing right now is what I would do as a therapist. I'm a counselor. I would do in the counseling room. I would just simply have a conversation. And most of the times people do believe we can get, and it's different among different generations, different cultures. But really, a lot of people have a problem with needing to address their thinking through talk. And because they see it sometimes as a moral failing, a spiritual failing. But that's the whole point. Why do we talk to our pastor or our priest? But to help change our thinking about what's going on around us. Well, counselors like myself do the same exact thing.
And with the type of therapy that you do, and I know you mentioned there's different types. I think sometimes, or even before I went to see a therapist or anybody, I would think that therapy is what you see on TV. You're in a room, you're on a couch, you have your legs kicked out, and you're just like talking through your problems. Mm-hmm. So are there different forms of therapy that someone could benefit from that would produce the same outcome?
Absolutely. So, I mean, for accessibility, for ease of access, doing it over your phone, sometimes face-to-face, virtually. However, sometimes people find that a little sterile, but there's a whole wide range. There's no regulation on me as a counselor saying that I have to have you with your feet up on a chase lounge. We can go pet my horse and talk at the same time. The younger kids, when I've worked with them, I had them mess around in a sandbox and just play with something, making their hands busy so that way their brain can be engaged with what I'm saying, and they're not really having to think too hard about what they're saying. They're just kind of putting it out there. Well, there's no change from little ones to us middle-aged and older ones. We do the same thing when we're busy with our hands and engaged in something, and we tend to open up emotionally. Walk and talk therapy. I love walking in nature. It's wonderful. Multiple different ways of doing it. It does not have to be in a sterile office with some sort of Zen artwork on the wall. That's a stereotype that doesn't need to be.
I'm glad we broke the stereotype today. And I know that you said there's different types of therapy and everything like that. Also, would you say that it's important to find the therapist that fits you? Because I think sometimes people might assume that if they meet with someone, they have to go with them. And that might be a holdup with with that generation or with generations in general. It's like, I have to go with this person because I met them. Would you say do your homework and find the person that's right for you?
Yes. And in fact, before I was on the way down here, this is a point I wanted to drive home. There's absolutely nothing wrong with shopping around, because one of the most important aspects of a therapeutic relationship, or just a relationship with anybody that wants to help you, is the relationship itself. So if you're meeting with somebody that you already feel a block with, that you're not gelling with, more than likely the therapeutic approach that counselor, social worker, psychologist is going to bring towards you is very unlikely to work. In fact, research, let me get a little nerdy here. The biggest predictor of success in therapy is not necessarily the approach the counselor takes. I have a very certain approach. Others have different approaches. It's the relationship between the counselor, therapist, and the client. So definitely shop around. That's critical. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. And counselors expect it.
Right.
That's not a problem. No offense to anybody.
And you brought up a really good point that I just kind of want to touch on, just for somebody to take away 2 points. If you had to nail it down to 2 points that someone should look for in a therapist when they're shopping around, what would those 2 or 3 points be? Like, should I look for accountability, or what are some practical things?
So, I would do your research on the different approaches. Essentially, you don't have to get too deep into it. I am a cognitive behavioral therapist or rational emotive behavioral therapist. That's really insider jargon. But what I typically do there is I address the here and now. I don't necessarily need to delve into your past. Irrelevant to me. I care mostly about how you're feeling, how you're thinking right now. I would definitely look into it, because oftentimes if you look on like Psychology Today, the therapist will put on there, this is my general approach. I am a cognitive behavioral therapist. Okay. Google that, see what that's all about. And that'll give you a good idea of what you may be walking into. That's one, but more often than that is just who you're comfortable with. Also, what's convenient to you as well. That's important. One of the things, I like to go to the gym a whole lot. And what's more important than what you do in the gym is actually just showing up. So if you show up consistently for the gym, same thing with therapy. If you show up consistently, you will develop change over time. So I do convenience, comfortability, and I can't find another C word, but the cognitive approach. There we go. I got a C in there.
Yes, you did. The 3. So is it 3 C's? I think you, yeah, we'll say 3 C's, triple C.
That's not a thing, but yeah, it is.
You remember?
Yeah, absolutely.
And when we're talking about, we're talking about therapy and all of those things. So what would drive someone to want to go to therapy? I know that in the baby boomer generation, typically it could look like, oh, I'm retiring, because that's, the age you brought up, retiring. You're looking at retirement or empty nesters. I'm trying to think what else. And I think those are things that really come to mind because I'm thinking about my own family and what phase they're in. And it's the retirement phase, and we're all moved out the house now. So do those bring some type of mental health aspect to it?
Sure. So when any phase of life brings a certain challenge in many ways. So focusing on these generations, the generation that we're talking about, we're transitioning from working, productive, raising families to starting to retire, taking a little bit more easy. And actually, and this is going to be hard for some people, is being more dependent than you were before. That's a hard transition for a lot of people because, and again, culturally speaking, I can speak for my own culture, being productive is really, really, really important to my folks. And when they realized, hey, retirement age is here, I'm actually not as sharp and fast as I once was, there was an identity crisis there, and they had to work through that. And you don't need to have some sort of formal diagnosis as saying, I am depressed, I need to go see a therapist. You can just say, I'm having trouble with this transition and I need to talk it out.
Yes, that's a good point. And I think sometimes too, you don't have to necessarily, like you said, have a clinical diagnosis or be depressed to seek therapy. It's kind of a tool that you use before you get to that depression point or, sadness. It's just, I'm just going to go talk to a friend,
And that's exactly it. And perhaps, previous human civilizations were a little bit better about gathering and talking to one another.
Yes.
But what I do as a counselor is very much what we've seen in the past. For example, we talked about World War II, right? What made them have less incidents of PTSD among World War II veterans than Vietnam veterans, right? Well, once World War II ended, they all got onto the boat and had to spend 2 weeks with all their brothers in arms, traveling slowly across the Pacific or the Atlantic to get home. What did they do the whole time? They talked, they debriefed, they shared their experiences with one another. Compare that to the baby boomer generation that experienced Vietnam. They served their year, they were separated from their platoon and sent back, and they were home within a day and got spat on. There's no talking there, right? And so that's a very different experience for these two people. One obviously had a higher degree of PTSD than the other. Of course, there's PTSD among the World War II veterans, but higher degree with the Vietnam veterans, and is very good theory that them not talking to one another was the culprit. And so what you can do with a therapist is similar to that, just talking to them, except a therapist is trained on how to do it well. I mean, in order to get to the critical point and move the development forward. And you don't need to have a severe issue. Of course, if you have a severe issue, come see a therapist. Right. But think of it as tuning up your car, going to your PCP to just get your checkup. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's very good at preventative before things become too much of a problem.
Preventative versus just reactive. And I think there's another good point that you brought up that I kind of want to touch on. You mentioned what I heard you say with the example you gave is having a community versus not having a community makes a huge difference. And as someone who is the daughter of like a baby boomer, how do we support, the baby boomer generation and not have them isolated when those big life changes happen, such as retirement or we moved out the house? How do we stay in communication, especially in today's society when it's a lot of, oh, I'm texting or I'm going out of town? Like, I feel like we don't have that community in this, time now.
Right. And a lot of us, we move for our jobs. It used to be where you grew up in your town, you worked in your town, you stayed there, and everybody stuck around. But now we're much more mobile. And that's hard on everybody, even the younger ones, because their support system that they, knew and loves them moved away from it. And then, of course, our support system back home doesn't have us to help support them. And that's a relatively newer thing in human civilization, and that's hard. But what can we do to support our parents, our grandparents? Well, one of the things is just being aware, watching, opening your eyes to what's going on around you, and perhaps noticing things that are pretty typical of this stage of life. So a lot of times when people are aging and reaching retirement, one of the crises is looking back on your life and saying, okay, did I live a life well lived? Is there meaning and purpose to it? Am I still worthwhile? Mm-hmm. And if you meet that crisis, and everybody will meet that crisis, and not really succeed in developing the wisdom and the self-esteem, for lack of a better way of putting it, and fond feelings, or at least some meaningfulness about your life, that always looks like despair, depression, loneliness, isolation. And if you notice your parents, especially with men, getting angrier, not talking as much, that's how men usually do it, but showing more anxiety or looking more depressed, isolating themselves, that's a clear sign that maybe we need to step in. But you mentioned community too. That's one of the biggest danger signs, is when people are isolated from the community. And that is one thing we can do to help them is, hey, I've noticed that you haven't really been hanging out with your church men's group as you once did. What's going on there? Right. That's really good for you. That's good for anybody to do it, and encourage them to continue doing so. So that is
some of the practical things there. And I know you started to touch on some of the signs we can look for in men particularly, and I know we'll touch on women in a little bit as well. Would you say, I know growing up I would always hear the term, he or she is going through a midlife crisis. Right. Is that like is that what we're talking about today, or is it something totally different?
It's kind of related to that. I mean, yeah, so people have noticed casually that when people are aging, there is a crisis of development there, right? There's something going on with all of us that go, especially during this time, a lot of people are concerned whether or not they are, productive, industrious. Are they able to help people, the people that are younger than them? Are they able to help the people that they're older than them? Because during that middle age, we're probably the most productive and capable as we ever been in our entire lives. I mean, that's when we have experience. We still have some youth in order to keep moving forward. And that's when typically research says we make the most money, we are able to care for the most people. But then we kind of lose our identity in the middle of that. And that's kind of the midlife crisis there.
That they're talking about.
But as we develop, and baby boomers have already kind of gone past this point, and generally speaking, it's more of transitioning from the fact that they were very productive, and now they're having to kind of pass the torch to Gen X and the millennials, and what is their identity now, and what is their meaning to what they're doing, and that's kind of the challenge they're facing now.
That's a good point that you brought up as well, how passing the torch, I think sometimes can be difficult, especially with that generation. So Tommy, when you think about your career, can you think about a time that really opened your eyes to say, hey, the baby boomer generation needs attention as far as the mental health, when we talk about mental health?
Right, sure. So when I was a young clinician like 15 years ago, the baby boomer generations, this is pre-retirement, still in that productivity stage. However, I was a clinician that would evaluate people for hospitalization, right? So they needed to go in for care because they're suicidal, homicidal, or so psychotic that they couldn't take care of themselves, so mentally ill that they couldn't take care of themselves, usually a psychosis. Of course, the thing I saw the most was suicidal ideation or suicidal thinking. At the time, the stat at the time was that one of the highest risk factors for completing suicide or attempting suicide was being a middle-aged, at the time, middle-aged white male, but really just middle-aged was one of the kind of the highest populations at the time. Well, that population has gotten older since then, but that was one of the times that opened my eyes as I was hospitalizing quite a lot of baby boomers. A lot of baby boomers were in crisis and expressing loss, grief, despair, and needed some help.
I think that is a great point that you make there, especially when we talk about that generation, because oftentimes they get left behind. So would you say I don't know what the statistics are right now, but in 2025, I know that we're bringing awareness to this today. Would you say that statistic that you just gave me about, the baby boomers being such a high rate of hospitalizations and everything that you experience, would that still be true today?
It absolutely is. And in fact, the CDC does say currently the highest rate of suicidality is among the oldest among us right now. Of course, one of the mental health crises defined by, advanced age is despair and depression. That happens a lot. Not only with, things like Alzheimer's, dementia, things like that. Depression is a part of it. That's a physical condition that leads to it, but also just developmentally, what that part of our lifespan, despair is a high risk.
And I think too, that what you just said definitely brings up a good point in regards to just making sure that we keep this generation basically wrapped in our arms, just, a bit, just making sure that we're aware they don't get left behind, because I don't think a lot of people knew that, because we're so focused on like the younger generation and the up and coming generation, but not realizing that we're all going to age one day and we have to be aware of what's going on. So I know that we've been talking a lot about the baby boomer generation in general, but I know that that's also a wide variety of people. And what I'm specifically think about is race and gender. Does race and gender play a role in, this at all?
Absolutely.
Or is it a one size fit all thing that we're looking at here?
Well, I mean, if we want to make it one size, oftentimes regardless of the cultural, racial, gender approach, it often ends in some sort of stigma avoidance of getting help, right?
Right.
But let's talk about the various differences. Black Americans and other minorities remember the Tuskegee experiments. White Americans, especially lost like me, we are culturally ingrained to be self-reliant and have a stiff upper lip. And if we get help, that means we're weak. Latino Americans, especially the men, they have to engage in machismo, and look strong. LGBT plus Americans that are baby boomers are pre-Stonewall. They were born before the APA stopped labeling homosexuality as a mental disorder.
Right.
So why necessarily trust this system that wasn't quite accepting, forgiving, or outright hurt you? So Appalachian Americans, those in Southwest Virginia and the mountains, the institutions had not treated them kindly as well. In fact, had some oppression there. So you name it. There's a cultural, racial aspect to approaching mental health because it's institutional. What can we say? It has to do with intellectualism and things like that have often spat out some unkind things, right? But then when we talk about gender differences, again, we have similar problems across the genders, but it manifests a little bit differently. Mm-hmm. So women, typically, let's say baby boomer women, they've often had compassion and caregiver fatigue at the time, and in their generation, women were definitely the primary caregivers, right? And at this point in their life, they've been caregivers for all of their life and pretty tired of it, and that manifests in a lot of anxiety and a lot of depression. It usually comes out of that. Men, they've been producers all their life, and they've had to been strong all their life. And now they're reaching the point where they're not quite producers, and they're not quite as strong as what they used to be. And their identity as an employee is disappearing, or just some workers is disappearing. And typically, even though they're experiencing anxiety and depression just like women are, it looks different. With men, typically it's rage, anger, or just stonewall, just silence, things like that.
Just going about life, just stonewalling everyone, which
Absolutely.
is definitely
It's strong.
hard one.
Yeah.
And I think you made a really good point when you talked about identity. Women typically wrap their identity in obviously homemaking. I don't know, but I feel like this generation we're more so bosses. I like to say like we want to work and do everything. But in the generation we're talking about, the identity lies in homemaking and making sure the family's okay. And men is typically, I'm going to put food on the table. I'm going to make sure that I'm working hard. And when that's stripped away, that's why we find out we're going down this rabbit hole of mental health and depression and everything that encompasses that. What are the differences that you see between men and women when it comes to the baby boomer generation and mental health?
Right. And we could say this about all generations, but generally speaking, men and women in the baby boomer generation, while they have similar internal emotions, similar feelings, it manifests outwardly a little bit differently. And generally speaking, women, having been caregivers, having worked a job, having had to do it all for quite a long time, at this time of their lives, they've probably had a lot of caregiver fatigue. And that kind of comes out as anxiety, a lot of depression. And men on the other side, they're dealing with their, of course, retirement years or lack of their less productivity and their identity. And sometimes, even though they're still feeling anxiety and depression themselves, it comes out as anger and stress and total shutting down sometimes. And because generally speaking, women are able to show their emotions and talk about their emotions a little bit better than men, they seek help. And here's a critical difference. I know I mentioned suicidality earlier.
Right.
Women are much more likely to attempt suicide, right? And are often intervened with because of that attempt. However, men are much more likely to complete the suicide because of the means that they use. Oftentimes a little bit more violent.
Yeah.
So yes, I personally was able to intervene and hospitalize much more women than I had men because of this difference.
Because they're more open to seek therapy and to get help versus men, I want to say. Do you know why? Or is there a why?
I could say, generally speaking, in my experience, women can talk circles around men. And typically, men isolate. We tend to be strong, and we have to be strong. We don't necessarily need to talk to our fellow males about our personal internal experiences, which, from what I understand, that's not necessarily a problem among the fair sex. So, we don't talk about it as much, and men tend to silently suffer, and it ends tragically more often than not.
That's a great point you brought up there as far as like men and women talk a little bit more than men. I think about just conversations that women have with our friends and how men don't talk to their friends that much. So just going back to the community part that we talked about earlier, it's all wrapped into one. So do you think that it's wise to also make sure that the baby boomers keep a sense of independence?
Oh, sure. And for everybody, I mean, we like to be in the least restrictive environment as we possibly can be, and still have purpose and meaning. When an individual loses that purpose and that meaning, all those individuals that I interviewed for hospitalization, that was one of the most common things that they did not have is purpose and meaning. So as a younger person with older family, don't necessarily take that away from them. No, certainly keep them engaged, encourage them to be engaged on their own. That's certainly something. And again, endemic to that point of their life is trying to find meaning and purpose, or making sure they continue having that meaning and purpose.
Thank you for letting us know that, because I think that that's important for people to actually hear so that we can take heed to that. I know we've talked a lot about just race, gender, things that can play a role in mental health as far as the baby boomer generation. Also something that I would like to touch on, because I think as you age, we sometimes, well, we do, there's not sometimes, we lose people around us. So I'm talking about grief and loss. Among that generation, how can they get through or navigate grief and loss? Because I think that might impact, it will impact anyone, but specifically this generation.
And of course, it's hitting them hardest right now. And 40 years from now, it's going to be us, right?
Right.
But one of the things when I've talked to people that have recently lost somebody dear to them is noting that grief and loss itself, or let's say grief itself, is not a mental disorder, all right? It is a normal thing. What you're feeling right now is absolutely normal. And I can't necessarily counsel you out of that, right? There's nothing I can really do or really want to do to help you, to stop you from feeling a normal feeling. If your friend passed away and you're very glum and sad and really reflecting on that person's life for a week or two and really remembering them and even tearing up quite often about it, I'm not going to do anything about that as your therapist. That's that problem. However, if you're, shaking the body in the casket during the service, we need to talk about that, right? There's a little bit of that is beyond grief. That is some sort of that's something that we would need to talk about. Saying usually the person thinking that person must not die. I can't stand losing them.
Right.
Or
live without them.
Yeah, or live without them, and that's where I would help that person understand. You've gone through, you've tolerated, you've handled a lot of things in your life. Use that experience to realize that you can stand a whole lot in your life, and the whole fact that you must not lose somebody, well, that's obviously not true. There's no musts here in life. There's no shoulds here in life. There's preferences. I would rather they be here, but that's not happening, And good news is you can stand this unfortunate thing that's happening to you. But before I even go to that point, if they're grieving the loss of somebody, I'm going to encourage them to go through the process and say, nothing but time.
Time heals.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully it heals. And what are some of the practical, I know that you mentioned that, don't rush someone through that process, but we also want to make sure that they don't necessarily stay there and think that they can't live without that person, no matter how hard it may be. So what are some of the practical steps that someone can take with assisting someone they can do to aid with that process and not suffer or decline mentally?
So, most certainly, it's always advisable just to simply talk to the individual about the person they lost. The grieving person wants to talk about that person. It's part of the process of grieving to talk about what that person meant to them, what they're losing in their own life when that person provided them. Through that process of you talking to the individual saying, Becky, my friend Becky, when she passed away, she used to visit me every Monday night. And we would have spaghetti together, and that's, I'm so sorry. Look, why don't we get together and have spaghetti on Monday nights? That's an example, but drawing that out of individuals and asking them, what did that person mean to you? And perhaps we can work together to help fill that void. Maybe we'll never fill it perfectly, but
close the gap some.
Seeing what they will be missing, or hey, that was my bridge partner or or some of my workout partner.
Right.
We used to walk together quite often. Well, now this person doesn't have a walking buddy. They're not going to get the exercise they used to do, nor the time when they used to talk. So there's a danger with that, and that person that's grieving may stop exercising, which will lead to other issues as well. So
bridging the gap. And what would be a good sign or indicator where they go through those phases saying you're bridging the gap for them? When is it a point where it says, okay, I need to seek help, professional help?
Right. So usually if grief lasts longer than a few months, when I mean grief, I'm not saying a year later on the anniversary being sad about the person.
That's pretty common.
Sure.
Right.
And I'm talking they're still down, blue, not getting out of bed, and it's been a couple months. This is something that obviously this person is thinking something on the lines of, I cannot live without this person. Right. I can't go on. That's something that a therapist or counselor would need to challenge.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for helping us be able to identify how long we can sit in something.
Sure.
And then when we should also bring attention to it and awareness to seek help. So, one doesn't have thoughts of self-harm or just despair that gets too low.
Right. And you don't say, get over it and kick them in the,
Oh,
down the mat, but validate their feelings, but at the same time, help them guide through, because it is a process, which time helps.
And while we're on the topic of grief and loss, I know that in the baby boomer generation, typically that's the type of age where you sometimes start to ail or, get sick and pass away. That's always going to happen to us. That's a part of life. It's the evolution. So is there a sense of loneliness that comes with that, where you're looking around and you're like, oh, I just lost my friend who's the same age as me, or, this happened. Is there a loneliness that comes alone and plays a role in the, I don't want to say typically decline or mental health?
Well, part of that stage of life, most certainly loneliness, is actually, in my line of work, one of the things we're very focused on among that population is loneliness, because loneliness is a precursor to all the other devastating things that we've talked about so far. Yes, they're losing the people around them. Their children are having children of their own, and they're very busy and maybe can't visit as much, or they're not even living in the same area anymore. So loneliness is a huge risk factor, especially if their friends and those close around them are starting to pass away. And yes, again, loneliness is an epidemic among the older population. So that, I'm glad you really mentioned that, because that is something that needs to be addressed. And as family members, as friends, that is something we can't let get away from us necessarily. It's, if, of course, baby boomers, continue to engage in your groups, continue to go out, meet new people. My grandmother, she was greatest generation, but she played bridge up until the day she died, so she was very engaged. Her friends came and visited her when her health started declining, things like that. So stay engaged with people, have your tribe, absolutely continue to do it. And as friends and family and support system around them, keep tabs,
Right.
We don't necessarily have to be there with them 24/7, but most certainly keep up with them, talk to them on the phone, visit them, have meals with them. Absolutely. But another thing that's really unique to this particular generation and this time in our history is that when we are reaching the end of life, especially when we're in hospice care or in the hospitals, we're, to put it bluntly, we're not dying the same as we used to. COVID happened. And now there are restrictions. My own father, he passed away about 3 years ago. And I could not visit him in the hospital, even though it wasn't COVID related, but it was because of COVID, I could not visit him in the hospital. And, we're going to talk about loneliness during one of the most vulnerable points of your life. So that is something to consider, and it's frightful, and it's something I hope our system addresses. But keep that in mind that, thankfully we have technology to at least speak to them over the phones, video chats, and things like that. But please understand that the folks with declining health we have restrictions on us now that doesn't make it the same as before, that we can gather around them like we used to. And we still need that as humans.
Exactly. We still need that support. And what I think about sometimes when you mentioned, the community and just making sure we're there for one another. What if I'm a baby boomer and I don't have any kids?
Right.
I don't have close family that I can depend on. It's just me. Yeah. What type of things that I can do to make sure that I am not lonely, or where do I find that support at? I think that's the biggest question that someone may have if they don't have family or children.
Well, and it ties into what I've mentioned before about meaning and purpose. What is that meaning and purpose to you? Take a look at that. And where does that drive you to go? Does it drive you to church? Does it drive you to volunteer your time? Does it drive you to take care of little ones in the nursery? Does it drive you to continue to consult? Because, okay, I can't go, 80 hours a week like I used to when I was running the company, but I can pull 10 hours a week and help, bring up the younger generation of leaders, or you name it. There's a lot of things you can do to continue to engage in the community that brings you meaning and purpose. And I would encourage anybody that's isolated right now, look into themselves and remember what they love to do, what brought them meaning, and then find a way to creatively engage in that with other people like you used, and so you can continue to have people around you.
So if you don't have that community, seek it so that you can have it when things may or may not happen. And I think people will always show up for someone. We just have to be willing to seek it and find it.
Yes. No man's an island. Even the great people of history had a lot of great people around them because they couldn't have done it on their own.
So something that I do want to talk about, and I think a lot of our viewers would probably appreciate, is the major life transitions and how do we safely transition from one aspect of life to another. And the three major categories that I'm thinking about is from working to retirement. How do I transition, make that transition smoothly? And then also from empty nester, from being in a house full of kids, raising a family, to now all the kids are gone and they have their own families. And the last category that I think about when I'm thinking about this generation is maybe the loss of a spouse. How do you navigate, or how would you say you navigate a smooth transition with those? I know obviously losing someone, a spouse, isn't something that you navigate like that, but what are some practical things one can do to make those transitions a bit easier in a sense?
Well, first, with any transition, the first thing I would emphasize is that smoothness is not the goal necessarily, right? It doesn't have to be smooth. In fact, it can be rough. That's fine. It's normal to struggle through the changes. And I know we've mentioned the people that have worked all their lives, that, took care of the children, and, that had some sort of identity wrapped up in something that they were doing when they were younger and middle-aged. Of course, one of the things we can do to make it easier, maybe too late to say it, but those folks that were already engaging with something that kind of increased their meaning and identity outside of what they do, they're engaged in other things. So, for example, I'm a counselor, I'm a therapist, but I love horses. I love to take care of the farm. I have other things I do besides my wife and children and my job, right? I'm not saying they're awful, but I am saying that there needs to be more than that to help you get through these sort of times and these transitions. Especially me, I'm in a men's club. As I go through my own life stages and go through my own struggles, just last night I was sitting around a group of my male counterparts of many different generations, and having a beer with them, asking them, "Hey, this is the problem I'm having right now. What do y'all think?" And they were able to help me through it. So I would definitely say set up the systems ahead of time, so that way, as you make the transition, it's a lot smoother. But let's say you haven't. Sure. What I would highly discourage anybody to do is to go into the transition cold. You see it coming. People born at 64, I don't think that, they're getting close to retirement, if not retirement already.
Right.
Ease into it. I know you are very productive, very hard workers. You're doing a whole lot. You're likely in leadership positions at this point, and people depend on you. But it's time to start slowly making sure everything is in place. That way, you're doing your hobbies a little bit more. You're being with the family a little bit more than you used to, and you're doing the career a little bit less, just as an example. And when it comes time to actually make that transition into retired life, you worked an hour that week, and then you hit the retire button, because that exists, right, and you hit the road. So that way you already know where you're going. Have a plan. And if you don't have a plan and you did hit it cold, it's okay. It's fine. It's just a rough transition, and we'll get through it. You can get through it. That's fine. There's no hard and fast rule to how to do this.
Right. I think you really made a great point there, where you said, it doesn't have to be perfect. I know I sometimes seek perfectionism and try to be perfect, but it doesn't have to be perfect. But make sure you had a plan. If you don't have a plan, you can still get a plan, but having a plan makes the transition smoother.
Right.
And if you don't have one, still get one. It's not too late. It's never too late to have a plan, but making sure that we have something that we're moving into and we still have that purpose and identity is important.
And if it's overwhelming, this is the time to ask for help. And there's a lot of ways you can get that help. And if it's okay for me to go into it, you can, for example, if you don't know where to turn, right? Mm-hmm. If you have a primary care physician, they know where to turn. Say it to them. They will be able to help you. I work for Sentara Health Plan. On the back of all of our ID cards, you flip it around, it says behavioral health, and right beside it is a phone number. You call that number, you're going to talk to a clinician like me. Moreover, psychologytoday.com, they can get you in help with a therapist. So there's a lot of different ways of getting help. And of course, if there's in a crisis, if you're feeling suicidal, homicidal, or anything like that, that you're in a behavioral health crisis, we got 988, which is the suicide prevention hotline, the crisis hotline. 911's fine too.
Right.
And that is all fine.
They'll get you to where
they will get you where you need to go. do not hesitate to call those numbers because they'll get you the help you need right away.
Thank you for pointing out those resources, because I think sometimes when people think about therapy and things of that nature, it's like, where do I go? Do I look online, top 100 therapists, or where do I go? So knowing that we have those resources are important. And what are some self-care things that one can do? Let's say if I'm in the state of, I don't think I won't need to see a therapist right now, but what are some self-care things that I can do to be able to make sure that I'm staying on top of what I'm doing?
Right. So one thing, if the beginning of your self-care is to see a therapist, that's fine too.
Right.
You don't have to do a bunch of these other things I'm going to mention before you do that. That could be the beginning of it. That's absolutely fine. Again, no hard and fast rules here. But of course, why do we call them feelings, right? It's because we feel them. Well, if your body feels like junk, you're going to feel like junk, So take care of your body. Drink plenty of water. I'm not going to say anything. This is what my baby boomer parents were telling me. Drink plenty of water, eat healthy, get plenty of sleep. I've already mentioned it. Have a tribe around you. Have social time, because humans, we're social creatures. Let's not deny our own nature. Be engaged with something meaningful to you, because if you're not engaged in something meaningful, the only option after that is despair. Despair is not healthy. So, there's a lot of things we can do, but take care of your bodies, take care of your mind, engage with a therapist, engage with your spiritual leader, engage with your friends and family. All kinds of things you can do. And there's no, I like to lift weights,
Right.
But if you like to walk, and trail,
walk.
who cares? It doesn't matter. Do those things.
Or get a support animal, whatever fits you.
It's all good. Yeah, all the above.
Before I let you go, Tommy, thank you so much for being here today, first and foremost. But what would you leave our viewers with? Like, what's a final thought, message that you want to send home for our viewers about today's episode?
Right. So we were talking about generational differences today, specifically with the baby boomers. And one thing I would like to say is they've gone through some unique things in history, and they're responding to it wonderfully. Not only did they have to live through things like I mentioned, Vietnam, they had to live through their children growing up through a post 9/11 world. And now as they're aging out and starting to have declining health, they had to go through COVID. And economic upheaval right now when they're trying to rely on their 401ks to make it through their entire retirement. So they did it, generationally speaking, they responded well. And, that being said, reach out for help, continue to press forward, take care of yourself, get the help you need.
Thank you so much. And one final question. I know I said I would let you close, but how can we continue to support our baby boomer generation?
Sure. As I said, having the tribe around you is very, very important. Having your community around you is very important. Just being there, being present, asking them questions, and responding properly.
Well, you heard it, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. We greatly appreciate it. And I know we just changed some lives today, so thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in this episode of Health Simplified. We hope today's conversation helps shed light on the emotional complexities that can come with aging, and that you feel more equipped to support yourself or someone you love. Whether it's retirement, caregiving, or simply learning to navigate this new season of life, you're not alone. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, we encourage you to seek help. Support is available. Call or text 988 to reach the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Help is available 24/7. Remember to always consult with your healthcare provider before taking any action based on the information provided in this podcast. If this conversation was helpful, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. And if you know someone who could benefit from this information, share it with them. Stay connected with us on Instagram and Facebook at Sentara Health Plans, and visit sentarahealthplans.com to learn more information about our health plans and wellness resources. Until next time, take care and stay well.